Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the campus of South Texas College of Law, Houston. This school was founded in 1923 with a mission of diversity, a mission of access, and a purposeful focus on justice. South Texas is the oldest law school in the city of Houston, and we are thrilled to welcome you to our campus today. We are honored to have so many esteemed representatives of our community with us. And I'd like to begin by recognizing some of our special guests. From the NAACP National Board of Directors, we have Leonard James with us today. Mr. James. We have members of the Armed Service and Veterans Affairs Committee of the NAACP Houston branch. This organization has spent a tremendous amount of time on this project, particularly beginning with the 100th anniversary of the Camp Logan situation in 2017. Let's welcome all of them as well. Captain Paul Matthews, the chairman of the board of the Buffalo Soldiers Museum and other leaders of the organization and the museum. Captain Matthews. Ambassador Chase Untermeyer, veteran of the U.S. Navy and the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Military veterans, would you stand please for recognition? One of those I would like to particularly recognize is Colonel Anthony Cavender, who has been working on this project since 2017. From Councilmember Abby Kamen, a representative is here, as well as Congressman Al Green is with us. And we have members of the South Texas College of Law Houston Board of Directors, including our new board chair, Janora Boykins. My name is Mike Berry, and I have the honor of serving as the president and dean of South Texas College of Law Houston. And today we are here to sign a memorandum of understanding, a memorandum that affirms the joint efforts of the NAACP Houston branch and South Texas College of Law Houston. This joint effort is to fight for long overdue justice and clemency for the soldiers of the 24th Infantry Regiment. As you will hear more today, these soldiers were unjustly convicted and punished by General Court-Martial in 1917 for their involvement in an alleged mutiny at Camp Logan here in Houston. To briefly describe the history and to tell you more about how we have arrived today, please welcome Jeffrey Korn, the Gary A. Kuiper Distinguished Professor of National Security Law at South Texas College of Law Houston. Professor.
Thank you, Dean Barry, and thanks to everybody who's here. A special thanks to Clyde Lemon for being the force behind this effort since I was involved in it in 2017, to Angela Holder, who you'll hear from later, who has made it her life's work to raise the awareness of this incident, to Tony Cavender, who got me involved when he called me one day and said, we're having a meeting about seeking clemency for these soldiers. My name is Jeff Korn. I'm a retired U.S. Army Judge Advocate General Officer, was a Lieutenant Colonel. And when Tony invited me to this project, I became very interested, but I also knew that the smartest person I knew in the Army was a friend of mine, Drew Brennerbeck, who I'm very excited to say has just been hired by South Texas College of Law to join our faculty, to join this effort to seek clemency for these soldiers. So a little bit of background, I only have about 5 minutes. In 1917, the Army came to Houston and said, we want to build training bases for the hundreds of thousands of conscripts that are going to be sent overseas to fight in World War I. We had declared war on Germany. In order to guard those bases, the Army, in its infinite wisdom, decided to send a battalion, the 3rd Battalion of the 24th Infantry Regiment, from their base in Utah to Houston. This was an all African-American unit. As you know, at that time, the military was segregated. It was a unit with a very distinguished history. They had fought patriotically and honorably in the Philippine insurrection. They had fought alongside Teddy Roosevelt in the Spanish-American War in Cuba. They had fought alongside General Blackjack Pershing when he conducted his punitive raid against Pancho Villa in Mexico in 1915. They were proud soldiers, and in the African-American community, they were somewhat of a group of celebrities because they represented, for many African-Americans, the very best of what it meant to be an American and to be a patriot. And as the dean said this morning, they fought 2 wars. They fought the wars that the nation sent them to fight, and they fought the wars of discrimination that they had to face. Interestingly, they were so respected in Utah that the community gave them a sending off parade when they came down to Houston. But the Army knew that there were incidents of racial violence between African-American soldiers and the white community in Texas and other locations. There had been an incident in Laredo where there had been problems and soldiers had been killed. When these soldiers arrived in Houston, the city was reluctant to bring them here, but the city wanted the contracts. So they were told to stay in the black part of the town and to basically know their place, so to speak. But there were problems that inevitably arose because when they started to see the abuse of the African-American community, they were incensed by it. And a couple of these soldiers had the temerity to stand up to what they saw was abusive treatment of fellow Americans. That led to these incidents with the Houston Police Department that ultimately erupted on the night of August 23rd, when the police arrested and beat one of the soldiers who was trying to intervene to protect a woman who had been dragged out of her home, half dressed, and was being beaten by the police. The word got back to the camp that there was a mob coming for the soldiers. They started to arm themselves. Their leadership was very weak. And the leaders, the commanders told them to stand down, and then suddenly shots were fired. Nobody was ever able to determine where the first shots came from, but it's very clear it didn't come from the soldiers. It came from someone outside the encampment. They marched out to confront what they thought was a mob. As they were marching out, they were shooting at porch lights because they were trying to prevent the illumination. And as a result, a number of people were killed. This led the police to respond with auxiliaries, and basically a battle occurred in Houston that night, something that not many of us know of. When you walk the grounds of Memorial Park, you're walking in the area where all this occurred. 6 police officers were killed that night, 9 civilians, 2 members of the Illinois National Guard that were sent to try and quell the situation, and 4 soldiers were killed that night and 3 died later of their wounds. The Army immediately disbanded the unit, and they were ultimately very quickly brought to Fort Sam Houston for 3 courts-martial. Now, I want you to imagine this. In the first trial, there were 63 defendants. This was the largest single criminal trial in American history. 63 defendants represented by 1 person, only 1. Now, if that's not bad enough, that 1 person wasn't even a lawyer. He was an Army major who had taught law at West Point, but was not a licensed attorney. And in the photo, you can see that there's a civilian sitting at the prosecution table. That civilian was the district attorney of the city of Houston. That's something that I've never heard of in military law, that the command would allow a civilian prosecutor to join the effort. It was a rush to judgment. Because we had declared war, the articles of war that they were tried under allowed the commanding general to approve the convictions and the sentences with absolutely no review, no legal review, no appeal, not even a review by the Judge Advocate General of the Army. Now, he didn't have to do that. He could have submitted the result of the trial for a review, but he used the authority that the Article of Wars gave him, and he immediately approved 13 death sentences. 13 non-commissioned officers were marched out to what is now a fairway at the Fort Sam Houston golf course, and at dawn, they were hung. Now, there were 110 soldiers convicted in 3 trials. 19 of them were executed. 40 of them were sentenced to life in prison. All of them were sentenced to confinement. And all they ever asked for was for a return to honor. They would write letters from the prison at Fort Leavenworth saying, please, all we wanted to do was fight for this country. Please return us to the colors. That's a military term for being returned to honor. So our effort that the NAACP started, that the law school got involved in thanks to Tony Cavender, that Drew Brennerbeck has been leading with students in the Actual Innocence Clinic and even students in the law department at the United States Military Academy at West Point have gotten involved in this project. Our effort is to ask the Secretary of the Army to sign a document that would posthumously grant honorable discharges to all of the soldiers that were convicted by these 3 courts-martial, and from there to go to the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records so that that board will recommend a pardon for all of these soldiers. Now, I just want to close with 2 quotes that I think are very important. The first comes from a 1960 report that was commissioned by Congress on military justice. It's called the Powell Report. To many civilians, discipline is synonymous with punishment. To the military man, discipline connotes something vastly different. It means an attitude of respect for authority developed by precept and by training. Discipline, a state of mind which leads to a willingness to obey an order, no matter how unpleasant or dangerous the task to be performed, is not characteristic of the civilian community. Development of this state of mind among soldiers is a command responsibility and a necessity. In the development of discipline, correction of individuals is indispensable. In correction, fairness or justice is indispensable. Thus, it is a mistake to talk of balancing discipline and justice. The 2 are inseparable. An unfair or unjust correction never promotes the development of discipline. As stated in our preliminary report, all correction must be fair. Both officers and soldiers must believe that it is fair. This was not fair correction. This may have been discipline, but this was not justice because they never had a chance. And there are some who might say, but isn't it true that many of these soldiers disobeyed orders, that they did march out of the camp, that they did engage in violence? That may very well be true. This was 1917. 15 years later, the Supreme Court of the United States would decide a case called Powell v. Alabama about the infamous Scottsboro trials, where African-American men were convicted of raping 2 white women who fabricated the story of being raped. And they were not given a fair opportunity for trial because they were not given adequate representation of counsel. Remember, 63 defendants, 1 defense representative who wasn't a lawyer. And there's a quote from Powell v. Alabama, a unanimous Supreme Court reversed those convictions on one basis, that the men who were convicted never had meaningful representation of counsel, which means they never had an opportunity for fair process. And this is what the court said. However guilty defendants, upon due inquiry, might prove to have been, they were, until convicted, presumed to be innocent. It was the duty of the court having their cases in charge to see that they were denied no necessary incident of a fair trial. I would say that 15 years earlier, it was the duty of the Army that had these cases in front of them to make sure that these men, these patriots who were put in a terrible situation, were not denied any incident of a fair trial. And there's no way that the Army met that obligation. And it's time for the Army to recognize that error and grant this petition so that their honor can be restored with recognition that there were failures that night, but those failures were not all the responsibility of those soldiers. Dean?
Thank you, Professor Korn. Dr. James Dixon serves as the president of the Houston branch of the NAACP. I'd like to invite him forward for a moment to discuss the importance of this effort and this collaboration to the NAACP. Dr. Dixon.
Thank you, Barry, and to Professor Corn. When we called him doctor, he reminded us his father was a doctor and he cut people up. So, Professor Corn, thank you so very much for your eloquent description of this noble purpose for which we have gathered today. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and to all of you who are distinguished personalities here on today. I am James Dixon, humbled to serve as the president of the Houston branch of the NAACP. We're honored to have distinguished persons here from our executive committee and our executive director as well. I would ask that they stand at this time along with our national board member, Mr. Leonard James. I want to recognize all the NAACP officers who are here. Congressman, the Honorable Congressman Al Green. Thank you. To honorable dignitary, of course, thank you so very much, Dr. Matthews, for all that you do with the Buffalo Soldiers Museum. It is my pleasure to represent the NAACP Cinema today, to thank all of us for coming together and to discuss an issue that deserves great attention, not only in our city, but in the United States of America. In 1917, the issue of the Crisis magazine, a writer named Martha Bruning wrote a detailed analysis of the investigation of the Camp Logan incident, already underway in the NAACP, by the NAACP. This Camp Logan incident, the riot, one of the earliest cases of injustice investigated and fought for by our organization. It still remains important to us today in 2021. We're here because we're on a quest to attain justice for the 24th Infantry Regiment. That organization of men, that organized group of men who died with shameful reputations at the hands of those who had the power of the government, the courts, and the power of the media. Today, we're here posthumously to do our part to make sure that history is made right. I thought about this, Professor Corn. How many more stories are there that we don't even know of? How many more men and women died under titles and labels, sentences that were unfounded, unjust, untrue, and yet those graves are marked with shameless reputations. And so today, the work that we're doing, in my opinion, represents not only those of the 24th Regiment, but many more who fell victims to systems that were not just, that were unfair. And just listening to your description, 63 clients, one lawyer, a civilian representing people in cases as serious as this, and rather than having the reputation as patriots, they were given the reputation of criminal insurrectionists. Today in 2021, it is necessary for us to have this conversation, and I want to commend the Armed Services Veterans Committee of the Houston NAACP for the stellar work that has been done mainly under the leadership of Clyde Lemon. I want to ask him to stand. In his usual manner, he's hiding himself. Clyde Lemon has done work. There he is. Come on, Clyde, give him a hand, please. NAACP began this work. It's been an extraordinary amount of time since 2017. There's hardly a week that goes by that Clyde doesn't mention something about Camp Logan. We appreciate your diligence, your discipline, and your determination. I think about Camp Logan and these soldiers often. In fact, in my own personal reflections, my church was founded in 1873 by the late Reverend Jack Yates, organized on Buffalo Bayou, State and Hemphill Streets. I am standing on the shoulders of Reverend Jack Yates. Our church was at State and Hemphill Street, moved to Fagan Street because of racial oppression, 5 minutes from Memorial Park. I grew up in the shadows of the memories of Camp Logan. I would hear the elders talk about it as a child, not fully comprehending the magnitude of the disaster and the riots. Did not know that one day I'd be the pastor of that church at 18 years old. My first summer job was at Memorial Park. I worked as a lifeguard at the swimming pool. I would hear about Memorial Park was not for us because the Camp Logan shadow hung over the park. Today, people jog through Memorial Park not knowing if they're jogging in a park where the history, untold history of Camp Logan took place. Our work today is so important. And so as I conclude my remarks, I want to say that the Houston NAACP is committed to seeing this process through to its completion. Yes, we want pardon, we want full clemency, but we also want to educate students across the breadth and width of this city, this nation, because we don't want to repeat these kinds of tragedies again. President Abraham Lincoln said, the probability that we may fail in the struggle ought not to deter us from the support of a cause we believe to be just. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a just cause. Each of us has an opportunity to participate in writing history so that the reputations of these soldiers, patriots, even posthumously, will serve to inspire us to make sure that we protect the freedoms and the dignity of all humankind and to elevate the fact that Blacks have been fighting for America even when America did not appreciate the fight. May God bless you. And thank you, South Texas School of Law, College of Law. The stellar job that you're doing and have done represents what we can do when we work together as opposed to working against one another. Thank you for your leadership. God bless.
Thank you, sir. I want to acknowledge that Commissioner Rodney Ellis has joined us. Commissioner Ellis, thank you for being here this morning. To discuss for a moment how important this is, not just here in Houston, but across our country, I'd like to invite Congressman Al Green to give a few remarks.
To the president and dean of this great institution, I may simply say Dean Barry, you are well deserving of an expression of appreciation for hiring, more appropriately, for having the wisdom to place at the helm of this board a female, not because she's a female, not because she is Black, but because she is capable, competent, and qualified, the Honorable Janora Orkin. She's here. For what South Texas has done. Diversity, it's not just this diversity. I love to hear diversity talked about. I love to hear the preaching, but it's the practice. It's the practice that makes a difference. 38,102 days ago, tragedy occurred. But William Cullen Bryant was right. truth crushed to earth shall rise again. So now we stand here more than 100 years later to deal with the truth that was buried in an earthly grave of lies. Truth crushed to earth shall rise again. You really don't have to be a historian. You don't have to be a scholar to know that at that time, Black men were not going to instigate a fight with the constabulary. They were not going to pick a fight with the police. Not only did people tell them where their place was, they knew that if they got out of place, bad things could happen. At that time, there's no question in my mind, for you to defend someone who was being treated unjustly, that in the minds of others was an offense. And all they did was try to seek justice for others at that time. So now here we are, some 104 years, 3 months later, with the opportunity, under the leadership of the most dynamic president the Houston branch has ever had. Now, I can say that with authority because I was a president of the Houston branch. And I have no problems acknowledging the better man. Bishop James Dixon is taking this NAACP to heights that it has never achieved before. And by the way, that's what he's supposed to do because he stands on the shoulders of giants. But he also has charted a course that is going to make history in ways that some of us could not imagine. For what he is doing now and the impact that he will make for the future, the destiny of people in this city, the symbiosis and synergy that he's generating, Bishop James Dixon deserves an expression of appreciation and love. Would you please join me in giving him Just not going away. Finally, I want to acknowledge my friend Chase. We've been friends. We served at the Urban League together. I want to acknowledge Yolanda Smith. Bishop, as you probably know, I was the one who hired her at the NAACP.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge the NAACP's National Board member, who seems to be just about everywhere all the time. I'm so glad he doesn't want to run for Congress. Leonard James, give him a hand, please. Buffalo soldiers. So today, dear friends, I close with this. William Cullen Bryant was right. Truth crushed to earth shall rise again. That's what we're doing today, what you're doing. I'm here to support you. But also, Carlyle was right. Carlyle, no lie can live forever. No lie can live forever. No lie can live forever. Let's put this lie to rest. Put this lie to rest and grant clemency. Grant clemency to those who earned it by virtue of their righteousness and what they did as members of the armed forces in this country. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Thank you. And I have a press release that will be handed out to those who would like to.
The fact that these events happened more than 100 years ago can make them seem abstract, can make them seem not real, but they are personal. Every one of those individuals had families, And in fact, today we have a member of one of those families here with us today. Professor Angela Holder is a descendant of a Camp Logan soldier. Would you please come and discuss what this means to you personally?
Good morning, everyone. It is my honor and privilege to speak before you this morning to introduce my great uncle, Corporal Jesse Paul Moore, to you. The loss of a son, brother, nephew, cousin, uncle, or in my case, great uncle, has been painful to say the least. It's not the fact that he died that was so hurting, but how he died, coupled with the second loss, nobody over which to mourn. As the old people used to say, he was not brought back to the bosom or heart of his family. A mother's premonition that something bad would happen to her son was not enough to deter the faraway longing for a better life in her son. No one had a clue that Uncle Jesse's leaving the town of Britain, Louisiana for Kentucky, and later the exotic tropics of the Philippines and the dusty plains of Mexico will leave him at the end of a noose in the pre-dawn hours of December 11, 1917. A life of unfulfilled promise is a tragedy in and of itself because he had just been promoted to corporal in May 1917. He was not married with children for us to embrace as an extension of him. He had brothers and sisters who kept his memory alive despite no place to go visit him. Jesse wrote his mother that he was not guilty of the charges and that he was at the camp during the riot. This letter came in a box containing his coat, Bible, and $1 after his death. She was never the same. Uncle Jesse's sister, Lovey, named her daughter Jessie and kept a picture of him in her home, which is how I came to know about him. As a tribute to her and my great-grandmother, I would like to have the words "service terminated by death without honor" removed from his service record. While I wanted to have the men given a posthumous honorable discharge like the men of the 25th Infantry Regiment in 1972, Jesse's 96-year-old niece, Dolores O'Connor Johnson, suggested a pardon. The family legacy from this event has been one to remain in service to this country, embrace and maintain a strong sense of justice and fairness, and continued optimism in the good of your fellow man. In his description of the fallout from the Camp Logan mutiny Houston riot of 1917, historian Dr. John Hope Franklin used the following quote from the New York Age newspaper: "Strict justice has been done, but full justice has not been done. And so sure as there is a God in heaven, at some time and in some way, full justice will be done." There have been discoveries of more descendants of participants from this night, meetings with scholars on the topic, and revelations from previously closed documents to warrant justice for these men. It is an overdue debt which needs to be settled to clear their names and bring peace to their souls. Please stop by the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum to see the exhibit of Camp Logan, and you will look into the faces of these young men. The average ages of these men, 22 to 24 years old. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Professor Holder, for showing us the personal side of this fight for justice. Hearing about your Uncle Jesse brings the history of a century ago right into this atrium with us today. South Texas College of Law, Houston is a mission-driven law school. We pride ourselves on teaching our students not only what the law is, but also about the principles of justice, what the law requires. And inherent is that is an education about due process. That is the protections that each of us possess, that the law affords to ensure that no one is unjustly deprived of life, liberty, or property. 100 years ago, the Camp Logan soldiers were denied due process. Our constitutional system, our system of justice, our system of laws failed them. The NAACP Houston branch and South Texas College of Law Houston share a common priority: the pursuit of justice. We have a shared interest in ensuring that an accurate historical narrative of the events that transpired at Camp Logan and the soldiers involved is told. We have a common interest in restoring proper honor and respect for the Buffalo soldiers stationed at Camp Logan. Soldiers who are some of the bravest men in our nation. Because of our commitment to equal justice under law, the NAACP Houston branch and South Texas College of Law Houston will continue collaborating to fulfill the mission of obtaining clemency for these Camp Logan soldiers. There is an adage that justice delayed is justice denied. And for the Camp Logan soldiers who were convicted in the absence of due process, and particularly for those who then were executed as a result of those wrongful convictions, the denial of justice can never fully be undone. But we as attorneys, as students of the law, make a commitment to justice. Where the system is broken, we are convicted to amend it. Where there is a wrong, we are dedicated to right it. We in the NAACP Houston branch are committed to the Camp Logan soldiers, in part to restore their honor. In that sense, this conversation is about the past. In the present, however, we are a better nation when we carefully examine our past and make amends when we have fallen short. This project, then, is designed in part to help right a historic wrong. But just as importantly, this conversation, this effort is about the future. The work to which we commit ourselves today helps ensure that the violence and the violations of due process of a century ago cannot happen again. At all times, in every situation, when it is easy, but particularly when it is hard, the safeguards of due process must be observed. We cannot take them for granted. We can never neglect them. We take these actions today to remind us all of the consequences of abandoning constitutional protections. We take these actions today to ensure that the failures of Camp Logan will never be repeated. To this effort, we here at South Texas College of Law Houston and the NAACP Houston branch are jointly resolved. Thank you. Dr. Dixon, shall we sign? Ladies and gentlemen, we stand adjourned. Thank you for attending and celebrating this historic event with us.